Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky. Good evening. This episode of True Murder is brought to you by Audible, the world's leading name in digital audiobooks. When Jerry Hyman's son arrived at his father's home in Everett, Washington, he found his grandmother, an Alzheimer's patient, alone in the house, starving and dehydrated. His father was missing. The furniture was gone. Within hours, police realized that Jerry's live-in housekeeper, Barbara Opel, had robbed him and fled. But where was Jerry? The next morning, Opel's 11-year-old son led police to Jerry's body. Soon, stunned detectives were getting confessions from a ragtag group of teens and preteens. At Barbara Opel's command, they had set upon Jerry Hyman with knives, fists, and baseball bats and battered him to death. From 13-year-old Heather, who frantically stabbed Jerry after having sex with her boyfriend, to 7-year-old Tiffany, who helped clean up the blood, this is the horrifying true story of how a mother turned her children and their friends into stone-cold killers and then rewarded them for their crime. The book that we're featuring this evening is Mom Said Kill, with my special guest, journalist and author, Burl Bear. Welcome back to the program, the incomparable Burl Bear.
It's always a pleasure to be on your show, Dan.
And it's always a pleasure to have you on my show, and the audience reacts accordingly. Let's get right down to this, another incredible story here, and the subsequent book, Mom Said Kill. Before we start, let's... Sure.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, as my friend Tony Stevens, who was news director of the radio station in Everett, Washington, where the crime took place, he said this murder, its aftermath, and the attempts by those involved to cover it up is so incredibly bizarre, so twisted in both its conception and execution, that I don't think we've ever witnessed a more tragic destruction of human life, not only by homicide, but by the manipulation of vulnerable youngsters. Now, this story isn't a whodunit. It's a how the hell did it ever happen in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I like about your book, and we'll get to that as the story proceeds, too, that this is, again, another, we'll say, typical Burl Bear, in that there is the story, and then there is the story behind the story, and then the analysis of what we can possibly learn from, like you say, such a senseless, bizarre, ridiculous, just waste of life.
Yes,
anyway, let's get to some of the characters here, and one of the main characters is Barbara Opel, and in 2001, when this crime occurs, she is 38. But tell us about Barbara Opel, as much as you found about Barbara Opel, her upbringing. What was Barbara Opel like? And before we talk about how she became in the position to be caretaker for Jerry Hyman.
Essentially, I'd say that she was damaged in shipping and handling, and some of her contents may have settled. Even as a child, her sister said that Barbara seemed to have some deep-rooted problems. And an analysis of her medical examination, whatever you want to call it, evaluation, determined that she really did not have the thought capacity, the planning capacity of a mature adult. She was pretty much on the same level as her kids, except she was the authority figure. By the time she was an adult, she got married. She had 2 kids by her husband. That marriage was a failure. They were divorced, and he moved off to Spokane. Sent money for the kids, but apparently it wasn't getting there, I guess. She did not exactly have the world's best reputation. She was known as a loud, screaming, obnoxious woman who yelled at her kids constantly, dragged one kid through the mall by his hair or something. I mean, just, really a domineering personality. But she also, being that she was kind of on the same level as the kids, she did all the same things the kids did. She kind of played with them when they played, but when she went into that authority mode, all bets were off. And the only way to stop the screaming, stop the abuse, was just do whatever Mom said, no matter what it was.
Now, where was her husband? Was it Bill at this time? What was the marriage? How could you, I guess, characterize the marriage? And where the heck was he during all this abuse? So, tell us a little bit about this 7-year marriage.
He didn't stick around very long. It was always very volatile. She was always screaming and yelling, and I guess he'd scream and yell back. Finally, he divorced her, moved off to the other side of the state. He didn't really get to see his kids. He wanted to, but it was. She was supposed to let him see the kids, but that just wasn't working out. It was always a problem. She then had a affair with Mr. Goudot, who is the father of her young daughter, Tiffany. That's why Tiffany has a different last name than the other kids,
right.
Although she and Mr. Goudot were never married.
And he'll come into play a little bit later as a kind of an important figure once again.
He's passed away. I'm in communication with his ex-wife, Tricia. If I'm pronouncing her name correctly, she also figures in the book quite prominently. As a matter of fact, at the very beginning. He was a colorful character in that he was an admitted bank robber, but he didn't think that should affect the validity of his testimony in court. Which really
not much.
That had nothing to do with his testimony.
Yeah, well, good luck with that. Now, we're talking about this place, Everett, Washington. Now, tell us what its close proximity to, so that we know geographically what we're talking about here. And what's Everett? Is it a suburb or is it a small town? What's it really like?
It's a small town with its own rather historical identity. It's north of Seattle, just west of Mukilteo, which is another smaller town. But Everett, at one time, was a significant logging town in the Pacific Northwest. There's also shipping from there. It's a lovely area. In fact, a lot of television shows shoot in Everett, Washington, because it has a variety of architecture. It can stand in for almost any city in America. So there's actually Warner Brothers even has a sound stage in Mukilteo, which is next door to Everett, and they do a lot of filming up there.
Interesting. Now, tell us about this Jerry Hyman, and at this time, again...
Jerry Hyman had worked for Boeing, the plane building company. In fact, the largest building in the world, not the tallest, but the largest building in the world, is in Everett, Washington. And that was the airplane manufacturing plant of Boeing when it was headquartered there, which isn't now, but it was for many, many years. And he worked for Boeing. He retired from there. And unfortunately, he was diagnosed with cancer. He was faced with a choice. He could devote his time and energy to getting treatment for his cancer, or he could devote his time and energy to caring for his Alzheimer's-afflicted mother. He chose to care for his mother. That was his entire focus, was not putting her off in a home or something, but taking care of her himself, living with her in the home, being a comfort to her, and concentrating more on the quality of life rather than the amount of it, I guess. And he needed some help around the house, and he just happened to bump into, I think of the Dairy Queen, fast food place, Barbara
Right.
Opel, who had lived in so many different places. She'd been evicted continually or kicked out for not paying rent, living in her car with her 3 kids, and struck up a conversation with him, and she told him that she'd be a wonderful caretaker for his aged and infirm mother. And she convinced him, and he moved her and her kids into his home, and they began taking care of this woman that the kids affectionately called Grandma. And actually, they did take good care of her when they were doing that.
Now, how long was it, and just to introduce the characters as well, that there is Derek, which is 11 years old, and Tiffany, the daughter, is 7 years old, and Heather is at the time of the 13, right? Okay, so, and the grandmother, go ahead.
I was going to say Heather was, it's going to sound very strange to say, a wonderful kid. She did very, very well in school, academically, charming personality, and a sports star, a legend, a sports legend at an early age, especially in terms of basketball, etc. She was a great sports person, very athletic, and excelled on the teams. The only problem was that the mother would show up and scream at her from the sidelines. But she was a very accomplished kid. I mean, if you were to say, what kid in this school is going to commit violent murder, her name would not even be anywhere near the list. It's something that no one could conceive of her being involved in such a thing.
Now, she was they said, a brilliant kid. So she's a very bright kid at the very least. How else would you characterize her personality? Was she somewhat, she was outgoing? Was she shy? Was she a little naive? What was the true depth of her character?
I would not characterize her as naive at all, especially considering the life she led, living in a variety of places, having a domineering mother. I think perhaps her life really maybe flourished in that school environment, away from home, because she was admired, she was respected, she was accomplished, and she was very comfortable in the realm of school, and everybody liked her, and she was a good-looking kid.
Now, we talked about Jerry Hyman a little bit, but what's interesting in your book is you talk about that a testament to this man's personality is that 3 of his really good friends happen to be ex-wives.
His ex-wives, yes. This is the guy, Jerry, from everything I've learned about him, and I mentioned this in the book, is one of these people that everybody liked. And maybe his problem with marriages was in the plurality. The problem with women was only in the plurality, not in the personality. And his ex-wives were still among his best friends, and he was seriously considering remarrying one of them for the second time, I think, or third time. It's hard to keep track. But everybody liked Jerry, and he always saw the best in everybody and brought out the best in other people. I've never heard an unkind word about Jerry Hyman.
Now, this is important to later in the story, in that for all accounts, Jerry's just this really great guy that has no problems with anybody, not with his kids, not with anyone, and in it, by all accounts too, he was very happy with the work that Barbara was doing, and he was happy with them being there and her entire family, her and her kids, and he was very generous with them as well. Was there any sort of dark personality that he had? Did Jerry get drunk once in a while and maybe be abusive to Heather? Was there anything like that?
He did drink, but he was not physically abusive, or I'd say the full extent of his, in quotes, verbal abuse is he thought sometimes she dressed a little slutty, and he said so. He would speak his mind. He wasn't the father, he wasn't the authority, but, he was an adult, and he would make comments that, maybe she should, dress a little bit more conservatively when she went out with the other kids. He was very generous. He bought them all Christmas presents, and very forgiving and overlooking of the faults. One time, Barbara, the primary caregiver of his mother, forged a check for I think about $1,200. She had some excuse, and he let it go. In fact, he even said to some of his friends that he said, if you hear that I got murdered, I wouldn't be. This is Barbara did it, but he wouldn't get rid of her. He wouldn't fire her because weighing one thing against another, she and the kids took great care of his mom, kept the place very clean and nice, and he could put up with a little bit of, figured life's short. He's died of cancer. He just wants to take care of his mom. He doesn't need the aggravation. Okay, we'll just let some things slide.
Now, was there, when I mentioned about, was there any type of possible verbal abuse, something that later on in the story, as we'll explain, is important if it's true or not true? When you say he thought she dressed a little bit slutty, did he indicate that? Did he use that kind of language, or was he reasonable in his criticism? Because then someone can turn that around. A young girl is very sensitive and may misconstrue.
Well, let me give you an example here. All right. Everyone that got roped into killing Jerry, Heather's friends, they all heard from her mother how horribly abusive Jerry was to her. And her best friend was this girl from Evergreen Middle School named Marion Oliver. And she says, now this is from one of the police officers told me. She told us of her involvement. She said that she'd been approached by Barbara Opel to kill Jerry Hyman, but Oliver declined because she didn't think she could do such a thing. She was always told that by Barbara that Heather was being abused. It was always Barbara telling people that. All the people who were angry about it never saw it themselves. Now, Marion did get in trouble with Jerry because she hit him once with a baseball bat. Not the time he was murdered, but at another time. And he didn't think that was particularly amusing and wanted her to get out of there.
Well, why did she hit him with a baseball bat then?
She was being very, very strange, and it was one of those things of kind of a kid doing something that wasn't necessarily malicious to begin with. It just got a little out of hand. Sometimes kids swing things around and act a little peculiar, and their motives aren't really severely bad, but something unfortunate happens, and that was kind of the situation there. So Barbara kept telling people how horribly abusive he was. Now, when he drank, he admittedly may have been cranky, but he never hurt these people. He was always financially generous, overlooked their faults, made sure they were comfortable and happy. And after all, he thought enough of them that he trusted his beloved mother to them, to take care of her. Feed her, bathe her, all that stuff.
Now, let's get to, because we're already speaking about it, Jerry has a son named Greg, and he hasn't seen him in 5 years. And like you had said, that Jerry had just found out, and I guess the son had found out, you can correct me if I'm wrong, about the terminal cancer, and him and his wife were flying in from Arkansas to visit with the father, and that's when, take it basically from there, they get off the plane, they expect Jerry to be there.
Yeah, I mean, this was a big build-up. Not only was a big build-up for Greg and his wife, but also for Jerry. He was so looking forward to seeing his son. And the son and his wife were so looking forward to seeing Dad. I mean, Jerry went out and he bought all their favorite foods. I mean, they were going to have a wonderful time. This is something, the level of expectation was right up there. And they get off the plane expecting Dad to meet him, and Dad's not there. And they wait and they wait and they wait. And they call the house and there's no answer, which is double peculiar because even if Dad somehow got the times mixed up, certainly Barbara, the caregiver, would answer the phone, but there was no answer. Finally, they took a cab all the way from SeaTac Airport to Everett, went to the house, and no one's opening the door. And there were even things on the front porch that had been left there for Jerry to give with them by actually his girlfriend or ex-wife or whatever. Greg finally lets himself into the house. He finds an open window or something, gets in there, and there's his grandmother, dehydrated, sitting at the table in a virtually empty room in a wheelchair, eating newspaper that's on the table, because that's the only thing she could get to put in her mouth. Now, this obviously doesn't look good at all. He hasn't.
And she's soiled, and she's been sitting in her own, sitting in her own feces for this amount of time.
And none of this, of course, makes any sense to him. Now, you can't really make sense out of something that doesn't make sense. So he doesn't quite know what to do. And now it's, later in the day, later in the evening, he's calling all around looking for his dad, trying to find him. His dad's ex-wife comes over to help look and try to find, and just can't make sense. Plus, they've had a long flight, so they, try to rest up. Whatever,
What else is in it?
Dad is.
Well, the other not suspicious thing is because they talk to the neighbor. They come to a house that was normally filled with things, and the place is empty.
Yeah, there's all sorts of furniture missing, and the neighbor lady, said, "Oh yeah, U-Haul came and gee, we heard he was off in Las Vegas." I mean, things just didn't make any sense. Just didn't add up. And what is really ironic is that the Everett Police Department gets a phone call, firstly the same day, from Mrs. Goudot, who calls to tell the Everett Police Department that she thinks Barbara Opel is going to kill Jerry Hyman.
Why is that?
Well, that's what the police want to know. She wouldn't leave her name. She just got this, like Crime Stoppers tip or whatever. So they get this fellow to, from, elderly services or whatever they call it, to go by the house and check on him. Well, he shows up. It's the next morning, and Greg's there. And the guy says, "Gee, I'm glad you're okay." He says, "No, I'm not my dad. We don't know where my dad is." I mean, this is very peculiar. It's all kind of, happens at the same time. And then, of course, now in the daylight, they see there's blood stains on the wheelchair, blood stains, little drops of blood on the wall, on the ceiling, on the chandelier. And then where's Barbara Opel? Where's Barbara and the kids? They call the cops. The cops are there. And no sooner do you have cops there than the phone rings or whatever, and it's one of the other policemen, totally disconnected from this, informing them that Barbara Opel has just been in a traffic mishap driving a U-Haul truck filled with furniture a few blocks away.
Now, what was the other thing that was very suspicious was that Jerry, being a business guy, padlocked his bedroom, his office bedroom, his room. And when they came, what did they find? Which, again...
They found that everything had been gone through. Papers were strewn everywhere, like a tornado hit the place. That was also very unusual because I was totally out of character with his father. But you don't want to think in your mind that, gee, someone came in here, ransacked my dad's house, my dad's missing, and they kidnapped him or something. You don't want to put your head in that place, especially after traveling all that way to see your dad. They figure there must be some rational explanation for this. Well, there never was a rational explanation for any of it. Not for the homicide, not for the aftermath, not for the crime or the follow-up. The whole thing is irrational.
Well, let's just go back just slightly because you talked about Mrs. Goudot, but we didn't talk about the information, where she got this information, and what it was is that
where she got the information and how the cops knew it was her was the cops had caller ID on their phone. So it showed where the call came from. The reason she called is her husband, was it Henry, I believe his name is. He had been approached by Barbara Opel to kill Jerry Hyman. She said she'd pay him $10,000 to do it. And
he was her ex-girlfriend, and they had been together drinking.
Yep. He went over there and put away a lot of beer, stayed overnight, and then goes home to his wife and tells her that Barbara offered him, at least $10,000 to kill this guy to take care of his mom.
Amazing.
He's kind of upset about that. Of course, his wife is double upset, and she tips off the cops just in case. And the timing on that could have been a day earlier. It might have been a big difference, but that's what she called. So
now, getting back to the accident that brings her to the police attention, through this the phone call and the other murder plot that just happens to be while they're looking at this scene potentially as a murder, at least missing person. Now, Barbara's in an accident with this U-Haul. How do police proceed with her, and what exactly are the first responding police that talk to Barbara? What do they know, or what do they think, and how do the police proceed?
Well, they really don't know what the hell happened. I mean, because they don't know where Jerry is. Now, it was about, I'd say, 24 hours after they arrived, after Greg and Teresa flew in from SeaTac. I guess, guys, it was Officer Sessions who got at Barbara Opel and Jeffery Grote. They had this U-Haul. We'll get to who Jeffery is in a bit, but anyway.
Yeah.
They were staying at the Roadway Inn, which is a motel on Everett Mall Way, not really that far from Jerry's house. She was driving, I guess, with a suspended license or something. She wasn't supposed to be driving the darn thing anyway. And, of course, the cops want to interview her and the kids on, where the heck is Jerry and why are you staying in a motel? And, they said, they didn't know that he was out of town. They hadn't seen him in a few days. It wasn't until the cops got the kids, the youngest ones, alone, which is unusual. And I don't know if it is ethical or not, or how, because there are rules about talking to kids, And I think they did have a Child Protective Services person there. And I believe it was little Teresa, the one that said, Jerry's dead. Just came right out and told them. And then they bring in the son, and he says, I know where the body is. I'll show you where the body is. So now things start to unravel real fast. But, of course, people may be asking, why would this woman have her kids murder this guy? What possible motive could there be when he's taking care of them, giving them a place to live? Very simple. Not nonsensical, but simple. Barbara Opel discovered that Jerry had $40,000 in his bank account. She wanted the $40,000. So, if we kill Jerry, we can get that money, in her mind. Now, you must understand, and this was used as part of her defense in the trial, that if you're going to kill somebody, not that it's the same thing to do, but if you plan to murder someone and steal their money, you would plan on trying to get away with murder and trying to get away with the money. Barbara Opel did not think that far. She only thought as far as, I want Jerry killed. It never crossed her mind what she was going to do once the body hit the floor. She had never even thought about that, never considered it. What do I do now? How do I not get caught? Where do I go? What do I do? None of that crossed her mind. And that was used as a defense. If you're going to kill someone and steal their money, you have some sort of plan. Well, she didn't. None whatsoever. All they did was load up a U-Haul, take it down the road, park it in the parking lot, and stayed in the motel room. And she went out and wrote a check on an apartment for them to live in, put a down payment on an apartment from Jerry's checkbook, and had dinner at Denny's restaurant after he was murdered.
Now let's get to the plan, the murder plot. Though she had spoken to her ex Henry Godot, and again, obviously he wasn't game for this plan. There was a boy that came into Heather's life. They met at the roller rink. They went bowling the next day. They had sex, as young people do, very quickly, at the home, at Jerry Hyman's home, with the mother present or around the home, and she knew of this.
Oh yeah, she said
like
it
you
up.
say, like you say in the book. Tell us what some mothers might, what kind of discussion they might have with the boyfriend.
She wanted a fall guy. She wanted someone who was close to being an adult who wasn't. In fact, she'd approached a few other people about doing this, and they all didn't take her seriously. They said no. But this nice-looking, athletic, strong guy, and he was a very sports person too, like a speed skater type. And Marion Oliver goes up to Jeff and says, "My girlfriend thinks you're cute. Go meet her." So he meets Heather, and she's cute, and he's not a bad-looking guy. Asks her to go bowling, as you mentioned, and next thing you know, 1 strike, 2 strikes, and they're having sex in her little brother's bedroom back at Jerry Hyman's house. The mother's totally aware of it. In fact, she's encouraging it, and this is kind of her plan from the get-go. She wanted to hook this kid in, so she used her, just turning 14-year-old daughter's budding sexuality as bait. And when he comes out of the bedroom, she sits him down to have a serious talk. It's not about safe sex. It's about murder. Says, will you, poor Heather, will you help Heather kill Jerry? And first he's not keen on the idea, but she sweetens the deal. Hey, listen, I'll get you a car to some money. In that case, sure. Yeah. She is picking people, she's hand-picking people who are not the most stable, on-the-ball people on the planet. She's picking people that have either got some sort of weakness to exploit or some antisocial issues, or they're problematic kids in the first place. She lets kids come over, and, of course it's legal in Washington, but it wasn't legal then. She's getting them high on pot, plus she's giving them some alcohol, which has never been legal there. It still isn't to give minors alcohol. And she was kind of the party mom, and then she'd tell them all these stories about how horrible Jerry was, and they just took her word for it. And the youngest ones, was the youngest, 13, they were under the impression all they were going to do was beat this guy up. But Jeffery and his cousin, I think, knew full well what the plan was, and that was to kill him, because Barbara wanted that $40,000. She told her daughter, Heather, that if you help kill Jerry, I'll get you a brand new dirt bike.
Wow.
And Heather wrote in her diary, Mom says if I kill Jerry, I can have a dirt bike. Oh, boy.
There you go. Now, you said that she's not one for much of a plan at all, but what was the semblance of a plan? Other than to kill him, was it to do it, did she have any idea where they should kill him, how they should kill him, what the excuse might be, anything?
Well, first she tried to poison him by putting weed killer in his pizza. That didn't work. So then she enlists these kids, and the idea is Jerry's going to come home from, the local tavern where he hangs out with his buddies. He's going to come home. You hide and wait for him. When he walks in the door, you beat him to a pulp with baseball bats and then stab him to death. And when he walked through the door, there were these kids, the oldest one with a full-size bat. The younger ones had these little souvenir bats. And Barbara is downstairs in the basement kind of acting as a cheerleader. Yeah, do it. And she's got Miriam Oliver and her 2 little kids down there with her. When Miriam realizes what's going on, she tries to jump out the window and run away. And in one verse of the story, Barbara grabs her and says, how can you leave when your best friend is upstairs killing someone? And Heather was upstairs. How can you leave her? You go up there and help out. In fact, it was Miriam who goes upstairs, and this guy's been beaten. He's been stabbed by Heather several times, stabbed by Miriam, and then finally she takes a baseball bat and crushes his skull and says, well, if he wasn't dead before, he is now.
Now, tell us all the members of this little murder squad. We've got Derek, the 11-year-old. We've got Tiffany, the 7-year-old, is there.
Yeah, well, they're down in the basement. They're not participating in the killing part.
Right.
They participate in the cleanup. But you have Heather, the daughter, her 18-year-old boyfriend, Jeff, his cousin, who about 13, 14, Kyle, and a couple of buddies of his about the same age. And 2 of them, when they realize things are going out of hand, that things are more than just beating this guy up, they immediately leave. They run away because they don't want any part of, something that bad. They just thought, going to punch the guy in the nose. They punched him in the nose, and when he saw he was still getting beaten, they went, and they ran away. But it was basically came down to Jeff and Heather and Miriam, who polished the thing off, and now there's blood everywhere, and poor Jerry's dead on the floor. They make 7-year-old Tiffany clean up the brains and the blood, and then they wrap the body up in a carpet or whatever and put it in a truck, and then they got to figure where we're going to dump the body, and they dump it out on the Indian reservation. I mean, it's just, it's a horrible, horrifying story that is made even more horrifying by the ineptitude, stupidity, and irrationality of the people who did it. The whole thing is just trash. And then there are people who had nothing to do with this who get roped into it. I think it's Kyle's cousin, a girl, winds up in the truck with one of these guys. She has no idea what's going on. She doesn't know what's happened. And all of a sudden, they're off dumping a body in the woods, and she's there. They don't say anything or we'll kill you. What's she supposed to do? It's a horrifying situation.
What's most horrifying to me in terms of just picturing it is the idea that Jerry Hyman's mother, who was, he was there.
Yes, they killed Jerry Hyman right in front of his mother. And there wasn't a thing she could do except sit there in the wheelchair and watch.
Incredible.
And then they left her there in the dark. They debated whether or not to kill her, but they decided no, they would just, they didn't want to do that. So they just left her sitting at the table.
So they knew that obviously the family knew that she wasn't going to be much of a witness whatsoever.
Oh, yeah, because she couldn't talk. She was
Alzheimer's.
Yeah. She needed someone caring for her at all times, so they just left her there, which is horrifying enough that they murder this fellow in front of his mother, and then they leave her there in the dark with no food, no water.
Now, this in short order, obviously the police sort this out because they have the whole family and they've had so many people to basically to testify potentially, but also just that were witnesses to this atrocity. Before we get to the trial, was there tell us about that procedure. Was it fairly seamless in terms of it wasn't hard to get to the facts?
Yeah, very difficult because you're dealing with kids. I mean, really, you're dealing with the exception of Jeff, who was 18. The rest of these people are 13 years old, 14 years old, 11 years old. And they brought in, and the court brought in, and the defense brought in, experts on children and children's thought processes, and that they don't even, well, for the most part, don't even understand basic things that are said to them, such as, you have a right to remain silent. They think that means don't make noise in the courtroom. They do, you have a right to legal representation. They don't even know what that means. You have a right to retain an attorney. Well, they have to go look up the word retain. They really don't even know what is transpiring. What's at stake, what's going on. So there's a big issue of whether or not these kids should be tried as adults and sent to an adult prison, or whether they should be tried as adults, sentenced as adults, but spend a certain amount of time in the juvenile prison and then be sent off to the crime school of the big house. So there was a great deal of discussion and legal arguing about what to do with these kids. It was finally decided, much to their shock, to try all of them as if they were adults, except for, I think, one of the youngest of the boys who ran away when this happened. And he didn't get the same, But in fact, I think when they were interviewing Heather, and she says, "I'm in trouble, aren't I?" I mean, I'm paraphrasing here. And she says, "Am I going to have to spend a lot of time in juvie, meaning juvenile hall? I only stabbed him, twice or 9 times, whatever it was. Am I, well, what's a long time to you in juvie?" She said, 2 weeks. She got like 20-some years. How did the judge justify this? You've got a kid. Again, we're getting into the trial a little bit here, but how does he decline to
treat her as a juvenile. And again, not every state has the ability to, under 17 or under 16, to be able to take somebody to an adult court. So is there no controversy in the law?
It was very controversial at the time. It was because of the especially heinous nature of the crime. The obvious premeditation, the planning, the somewhat humor and delight they seemed to take in it. I mean, they thought it was funny that after he was murdered, they went out to Denny's restaurant for what was called the Grand Slam breakfast. They thought that was rather amusing. I mean, it is so twisted that what they could tell, and there were, evaluations of Heather, because here's this bright girl, and yet to this day, from what I understand, she does not see her mother in a bad light. She was so much that whatever Mom said was the thing to do. And, if whatever Mom said, you went along with. And if Mom wanted to exaggerate the relationship between her and Jerry, no matter what she did, you don't cross Mom. Total, instant, exact, and complete obedience to whatever Mom says.
Now, how did Mom try to defend herself, at least at first to the police, and then later at trial? What was her strategy? How did she try to get out of this?
She tried to blame everything first on Jeff. That she just wanted him, wanted Jerry beat up, but it was Jeff's idea to kill him. Jeff's idea to wrap the body in the carpet. Jeff's idea to dump the body on the Indian reservation, and then later she tried to blame it all on her daughter, on Heather. She was perfectly willing to throw Heather under the bus of blame, anything to take it off herself. I mean, the woman's a real piece of work. She's not going to win any, Mother of the Year, Queen for a Day stuff. Just horrifying.
How did the media respond to this? Because this is another dimension to killer kids is pretty unusual, But then when you have this a killer mom directing the killer kids, and the kind of details like the 7-year-old picking up pieces of the skull and putting it in the trash and cleaning up the blood, and the 11-year-old participating, and all of these kids participating, it is a new, benchmark.
You've got to figure the residual damage of this. Now, when my book, Mom Said Kill, first came out in paperback, it was, of course, on the shelves at the store, the grocery store, whatever, up there in Everett, Marysville, Washington, where Tiffany, who was 7 at the time, was now, of course, older. The book came out originally a couple of years ago. She requested that the book be taken off the shelves in the store because it was so painful for her to go to the grocery store and see this picture of her mother, on the cover of this book, And they did take the book off the shelf, which I wasn't too thrilled about. But, as if nothing else is going to remind Tiffany of what happened.
Yeah.
But the brother, this is really tragic. Here his mom has been sent, I'm getting ahead of the story, but you can figure it out easily enough. The mom is sent to life in prison. His sister is sentenced to, 23 years or something. What does he want to do? He wants to go to prison, too. Who wouldn't?
Sure.
Gee, Mom is going to prison. I said, what can I do to go to prison? How much trouble can I get in? And how fast? Somehow that's going to reunite them or something. So it's been real problematic for him.
Now, at trial, what was the dynamic in terms of if Barbara's trying to blame her daughter, and Barbara's trying to initially blame the boyfriend, the new boyfriend? I mean, it was only a boyfriend. It was a week after he met Heather, and voila, he's in this major trouble. What was the dynamic at court? Who testified against the mother? Who was the damaging?
Everybody and their dog testified against the mother. The people who had Henry Goudreau, of course, testified that she tried to get him to kill, and the defense is saying, well, aren't you just saying this and coming down on Barbara because you don't want your wife mad at you because she was mad that you spent the night over at Barbara's house? And he's going, no, I'm not saying this just because I don't want my wife mad at me. This is the truth. I said, well, aren't you a bank robber? Well, I was once, but that had to do with it. The defense really, she got the best defense one could possibly get under the circumstances. And it's important for people to have the best defense possible because what the defense attorneys are defending here in the States is they're defending the law, and they're defending the Constitution because you don't want people convicted if there's, reasonable doubt. But in this case, there absolutely was no reasonable doubt as to who did what. It was all very, very clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, so you say that Heather, and you write in a book too, Heather really doesn't really hate her mother, despite
no,
this.
not at all. She still thinks her mom's just swell. Kids, everyone wants to love their mother no matter what.
I guess,
And what else can she do? She was a good kid. She did what her mom, always do what your parents say, kids. And, she did what her mom said.
How does Jeffrey Grote feel about this whole thing?
Well, I think he really felt screwed over in a big way. Interesting that Jeff, he got 50 years in prison, and he has an ad out there, if you want to write a prisoner about what a nice guy he is and how he likes his soul music and he's into sports and he'd really like a good pen pal.
Sure.
Yeah, here's another guy whose life was ruined. He could have gone on the rest of his days without probably ever being in trouble. On that dimension.
Now, this is a good segue. We can use this as a good segue because, again, as I mentioned in the beginning of our program, what I like about your books and what your fans like about your books, too, is that there's an added dimension to the story in the terms of some analysis. Try to come up with some semblance of sense to this in terms of, again, it's a cliche to avoid and prevent, but you really try to do that. You try to go that extra mile in terms of all the available information. And so in this book, which I thought was, again, I'm a little bit of a skeptic, so I can open my mind to this, thanks to you, about brain injury and psychopathology in terms of what can we learn about why would these people do this for this clearly psychopathic woman, Barbara Opel. The rewards weren't that great. These people seem to be decent people, and without, like you mentioned, without this fateful circumstance, they would have went on to do nothing like this. So how can you explain it? A couple of them may have been in
trouble. Kyle, some of them like to imagine themselves as being tough, gangsterish guy, at 13 playing a role. But when push came to shove, they didn't want to be part of murder, And as for Miriam Oliver, she says, I got mad because she's my best friend. I didn't want anyone hurting her. And, Barbara was always saying, oh, she's your best friend. Don't you want to help her get back at Jerry? He's so mean to her. One telephone call, I was looking at my own book here, she kept asking Miriam if she'd help do this murder. And around March, Barbara persisted with several more attempts. One time she asked me, said Miriam, do you want to kill Jerry with us? I was shocked, and I said no. She later changed her mind. If we got caught, she was told, blame everything on Jeff. This is what Barbara Opel told Miriam Oliver. If we get caught, blame everything on Jeff. So, Barbara at least had figured out who she was going to blame for this. Now, she would always tell these stories, and it's interesting that these dramatic vignettes that she would tell these kids, that Barbara would tell these kids about how bad Jerry was. She would say, he almost hit Heather. He almost hit Derek. I was afraid he was going to hit so-and-so, or he could have easily hit so-and-so. Upon reflection, Miriam admitted that she never heard of Jerry actually hitting anyone, only that he almost hit someone. But you keep telling these stories over long enough for these impressionable kids, and they all want to band together to protect poor Heather. And Heather's getting a dirt bike, so she's keeping her mouth shut.
Yeah, incredible.
It's interesting that when Heather was awaiting trial and she was in juvie, the other kids in juvie were kind of giving her a bad time. Hey, where's that dirt bike you're going to get?
Jeez. Wow. Now,
but
you talked about...
question about psychopaths. You want me to address that issue? There's two ways that we know of scientifically to be a psychopath. One is it's a birth defect of brain processing. People who are psychopaths, their brains do not process information the same as people who are not. The expression used by Dr. Robert Hare, the world's leading expert, who happens to be a Canadian, you'd be quite proud of that, is his statement is, they know the words, but they can't hear the music. And the example I use is I draw an analogy with my brother, who is not a psychopath, but my brother is colorblind. You can talk about red, blue, green, and yellow all you want, but he's never seen it. And the expression red hot means nothing to him because he doesn't know what red is. And all the amount of support groups, all the amount of counseling in the world is not going to endow my brother with the ability to see red, comprehend green, or blue, or yellow, or any of those. That chip is missing. Psychopaths are missing the emotion chip. It's not that they are complex people at all, just the opposite. Their interior world is very one-dimensional, very flat. They see themselves as the center of the universe, see themselves as victims. They don't care about anybody but themselves. And it's interesting that the psychopathic murderer, Hickman, was the role model for Ayn Rand and her book Atlas Shrugged. She thought that psychopath was a great embodiment of the American spirit because all he cared about was himself. Go figure.
Well, no, but according to Robert Hare, though, like just to, be devil's advocate here, is that he describes psychopaths who might be a boss or might be an ambitious, we'll say, I don't know, director of a movie or something, very successful, narcissistic, maybe egocentric, maybe verbally abusive to people, used to a lot of power, but certainly no one would say, oh, yeah, but that means that they have the capacity or the inclination or any other adjective towards a violent outcome, especially murder. So how can, once you identify that somebody has this effect...
Well, maybe the subtle difference or not so subtle difference between a sociopath and a psychopath. As Dr. Hare said, the largest collection of sociopaths was the Vancouver Stock Exchange before it was regulated because they could just take advantage of people like crazy. As I mentioned, the one way of acquiring psychopathy or to a degree sociopathy is to be born missing that chip. The other is a head injury coupled with abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, etc. In my book, Headshot, there were two psychopaths. One was born that way. The other was made that way. In fact, I was reading someone talking about the show I was on where we talked about that. It was criticizing us because we laughed about poor Andrew Webb, whose mother ran over his head with the car, and then realizing what she'd done, she backed up and ran over his head again and said, we shouldn't have joked about that. But that was his problem. He was in a home of multi-generational incest, and he'd had more than one severe head injury. Now, I am not a psychopath, but I do have some of the characteristics one would associate with sociopaths, in that I had a head injury, and I am incapable of seeing a connection between crime and punishment. I don't understand the concept. You can talk to me and be reasonable to me about it, but I've yet to grasp what positive effect punishment has in rectifying a situation. I can see for the purposes of safety and protection of people, of separating the offender from society to protect people from their behavior. But I do not understand the punitive model of punishment at all. I don't see a relationship. I mean, there must be one, otherwise it wouldn't exist in society, but I'm incapable of comprehending it. Now, that may be because of the head injury. I don't know. It doesn't mean that I don't think that anything should be done to people who commit, violent acts, but I look at it more from the standpoint of protecting people from their behavior and seeing what can be done to rehabilitate them. It's just like what the studies have shown that the more you punish someone for lying, the more they lie. And the more you punish
the thing is,
what you're exhibiting,
what you're exhibiting, though, is empathy, which is what probably the true sociopath has little of. Because obviously you've come to this conclusion as
they can't empathize. They can mimic. They can cry on cue. They're very good at crying.
Sure.
They can mimic behaviors, but they don't experience them. Whether they're carving a turkey or carving a person doesn't seem to make much difference. It's interesting. There is a website for sociopaths, run by sociopaths. And as it says that I don't do any of those bad things because if I do, my life will be miserable. And being as that my life is the only one I care about, I don't want to be miserable.
Yeah.
They say that a third-grade teacher can spot these people a mile away when they're young. And if you can get to them when they're young, way prior to the age of 14, because about 14 is when they start showing up in the legal system because they're getting in trouble. But if you can get them when they're really little and teach them that they can have perfectly fine, rewarding lives, and their lives will be more rewarding if they don't mistreat other people. Now, whether that means not cheating them in business, that their life will be happier, and that's the only life they care about is theirs, if they don't do those things. So it's a matter of finding the proper motivation for the appropriate behavior.
Well, I can agree with you there that at least this is a tangible attempt to address the problem because, like I say, I think that the phenomena of kids killing their parents or someone, in their family is incredible enough and unusual enough and a super disturbing trend. But this story illustrates that there might be more to come in the near future. I mean, in terms of if you can get 10 kids to be involved in something like this, we got to have some kind of intervention.
Especially when you have an authority figure, such as the mother, who is also very friendly, facilitates their problems, shall we say, by giving them alcohol, giving them drugs, hooking them in with these stories of righteous indignation. She's not telling them really that, hey, I want to get my hands on this $40,000. She tells them, I'll get you a car, And what does she say to Jeff? She says, keep your mouth shut when the cops come. She says, keep your mouth shut, and you can borrow the car anytime you want. Just say the word, and I'll give you the keys, but keep your mouth shut. Meanwhile, she's planning to blame everything on him.
Wow. Now, this story, too, Burl, has got a lot of legs because this thing has been turned into couple programs with your friend, and again, if I mispronounce this, Darren Kavinoky. Yeah, tell us about your appearances on Investigation Discovery. I saw you last year, and it was great seeing the super serious Burl Bear, and they really utilized you in that program. It was a great program, too. It really was a great documentary.
Very fortunate with Investigation Discovery. There's a lot of different shows. They're all done by different producers from different countries. Some are Canadian, some are Australian, some are American. And I've done Scorned, Snap, Behind Mansion Walls, Deadly Women, Deadly Sins, Motives and Murders. I really must compliment, especially Motives and Murders. Cracking the Case is the name of the show. I was on that recently, a story about it. I didn't do it. I just did a mini book on called Murder on 9/11 about the murder of Robert Henry in Tacoma, Washington. They did just a beautiful job on that show, and Deadly Sins also does a great job. I just was on Deadly Sins last Saturday on a case that I haven't written a book about, and I'm going to be on again February 8th with Frank Girardo, who's another great journalist. We'll be talking about the Mei-Ling Williams homicide case down here in California, which is another real shocker. And the interesting thing about Deadly Sins is Darren and I, he is on the board of directors of what's called Writers in Treatment. It's a nonprofit organization started by Leonard Bushell and Robert Downey Sr. that offers treatment and financial aid for treatment for people who write, who make a living writing or working in the writing and publishing industry, who may have developed problems with alcohol, drugs, or gambling or anything like that that have become a problem. And a lot of people who are writers don't have insurance, this type of thing, and don't have the wherewithal to get help. And so Writers in Treatment helps out. And they also put on what's called the Real Recovery Film Festival in a number of cities, and every year they give the Experience, Strength, and Hope Awards, hosted by Ed Begley Jr. and Robert Downey Jr. He had 2 juniors there last year, giving an award to the guy who ran. And I'm on the advisory board. He's on the executive board, and I'm on the advisory board. So we wound up meeting through Leonard, and Darren said, "Guy, I got this idea of doing a book called Deadly Sins, where we do different stories about these 7 deadly sins that, this is when Charlie Sheen was going through all of his stuff, and we thought it'd be a cool book. Well, it wound up not being a book. We didn't follow through with that. It wound up being a TV series, and with Darren hosting it, and his people inviting me to participate and doing shows based on either books I've written or cases that I have suggested to them. And they've been great to work with, and I'm very proud to be associated with them. And also, interestingly, they did an adaptation of Mom Said Kill several years ago, and they still run it on Deadly Women, episode called Bloodlines. And then on Deadly Sins, it was also done with the title Mommy's Little Killers. And both of them are available online to watch. And both did very good adaptations of the story. I was very pleased.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's it's always great promotion when you've got so many people watching Investigation Discovery. And then, again, there's so many stories out there competing for people's attention. And but it's nice.
Then again, by the same token, there's only so many stories, up for adaptation. It wasn't planned this way, but Mommy's Little Killers was like the first episode, I think, of season 2 of Deadly Sins. Mm-hmm. And the same week, like a day before, on a rerun on Investigation Discovery, was Deadly Women episode, Bloodlines, which was the same story. It wasn't planned that way. It just happened that way, that 2 different shows had the same crime, same story, the same week. That's what they're always looking for. New stuff.
Well, it's really nice because they get I guess the reader gets to see, because gets to rarely get to see you live and do something like this, which is just great promo. Adds another dimension to the book, and of course it can't harm anybody looking to find another book that's fascinating to have that kind of promotion and that kind of high profile treatment of a story.
What I like about Investigation Discovery, and I think it may be true with what's called the Crime and Investigation, which is a very similar network that they have in the UK, and maybe they have it in Canada, but those are all the same programming, is that these people do read, and they spend more time watching the show than people do on other networks. So they're into it, they're into it. A little different than Nancy Grace's audience, which doesn't tend to be, shall we say, book readers. Or literate.
Yeah. I was going to say,
I got to be
hate to beat up on Nancy Grace. But.
I don't want to beat up on Nancy, but it is a different crowd. Yeah, different crowd. And so
Absolutely,
I'm really always pleased to be on ID Network. And Darren, of course, I have known him for a few years now, and he was a guest on my radio show last week, and we had a great time.
And it's interesting too that the foundation that he has, because he's had some issues himself, and so it's nice to see him put his time and effort into that. And that's if people want to go and listen to the interview. And we should put a plug in for your fine program as well, Burl, with True Crime Uncensored on Saturdays on Outlaw Radio. Give us a little bit more information about that.
Oh yeah, that's we've got a nice little lineup of programs on outlawradiousa.com. So if you go to outlawradiousa.com, let's say about Matt Allen and the Demons of Decadence. Actually, everything is broadcast live from a replica of an 1876 Virginia City-style bar built in Matt Allen's backyard in the hills of Encino, California. And he's been doing his Outlaw Radio show for several years, many years, more than a decade. And then he approached me about doing a show, and so I figured, well, I'll do a true crime show. And I started out about 5-6 years ago, first with Don Waldman as my co-host, and now with Howard Lapidus. We joke he's manager to the star. He manages Dr. Drew Pinsky. Well, he also manages Darren Kavanoki and Burl Bear, among others. So with him and our fact checker, Mark Boyer. And right before our show, 1 o'clock, Lori Downey, we call her Lori Downey Jr., the widow of the great Morton Downey Jr., and Lynette Miller do a new show called Broadcasting. This is too broad, podcasting. Then our show, True Crime Uncensored, then Matt Allen and the Demons of Decadence, including Howard, myself, and Mark, and all sorts of other fun and exciting people go and pass out, basically.
Yeah, it's a great show, great guest, and it's a lot of fun too. It's
people
who knew True Crime could be fun.
Yeah, that was kind of our approach, and some people kind of go, oh, geez, what are we getting into here? But with the exception of a couple really tragic ones where we had the mother of the murdered person on the show, where we had to be a little more. I mean, the crimes, etc., are always horrifying, and maybe it's gallows humor. But we try to do the same thing. You do get to the meat of the matter. I concentrate on the story, and Howard concentrates on the personal life of the author. Except for me, when Aaron Moriarty or Gary Drobin or someone's on the show, it's well known that the first question I always ask is, "What are you wearing?"
What are you wearing? Yeah, no, it's great. It's a great program. I wanted to mention too that I'm really happy to have Audible as the sponsor of True Murder. And like I said, this episode of True Murder was brought to you by Audible, world's leading name in digital audio books.
They are wonderful.
Do you have any negotiations with any of your books to be released through Audible in the near future?
Well, they could be if I would get off my literary posterior. And,
do that.
I have the Audible, the audio rights, and it's just a matter of me taking the time to get, kind of deal with the narrator and go through that process that you go through. It's very easy to do. It's just that I've been so busy. It's just one more thing I haven't done yet.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But when I first heard about Audible, it goes back about several years ago, when not that many people had heard of it. And there was a guy I knew that was doing like a fantasy or science fiction series, and had him up on Audible, and he was doing remarkably well. People were loving that stuff, and I'd never even heard of it before. I mean, I've heard of audiobooks before, but I hadn't heard of Audible until they turned me on to it. And I've been really impressed, and I'm happy to hear that you've got them as a sponsor on your show.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, right now Audible has a 30-day free trial where you can choose the book of your desire and download it and experience. I mean, for people that don't know, the first audiobook that I listened to was Stephen Singular, BTK, and so it came in a big box set.
He is a great author. Have you had Stephen on your show? What a great guy.
Yes, I did.
Well, if you really want to have a fascinating conversation, ask about the Oj Simpson case.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the only programs I haven't covered yet, and I plan to do that because that's, of course, that captivated everyone's imagination everywhere. That the image of him in a slow speed chase in his Bronco was indelible, I would think.
I'll tell you,
absolutely.
Stephen really found himself in a linchpin role in that trial because he received inside information from the LAPD on evidence on why the blood samples were not being given to the defense. the defense thought it was the prosecution that was stalling him, but it wasn't. It was the LAPD because they knew there was something wrong with the blood evidence. They didn't want the defense to know about it. Of course, that's when, so Stephen winds up being part of the story, and journalists don't like to be part of the story. But there was no way that he could not be, and that's why one major reason why the jury came back with the not guilty verdict was that the blood evidence was all tainted with that preservative. It was the blood that O.J. gave when he got back from Chicago, not blood for the night of the crime, which put a whole new dimension on things. So,
yeah, I'll have to contact Stephen too. He probably has the BTK book out on audiobook, so that might be interesting case to revisit.
I'll get around to doing that. I don't know whether I should narrate it myself. Whether I should have.
I think so. No, you got a great voice, Burl. You should narrate yourself. I think it would be add another dimension to it, where you actually talk about intimate, because there is so much of your character in these books. A lot of people don't inject themselves into the story, and you do. You've always.
The one where I really do, and maybe I'll come back on your show if you want in a few months to talk about. I have a book coming out very soon called Man Overboard, The Counterfeit Resurrection of Phil Champagne. It's the 20th anniversary edition. It was the first true crime book I ever did, and it is one where I interject more than you have ever heard an author do in a true crime book before. It's actually a funny true crime book. And whether it is true or a pack of lies is for the audience to decide. But 20 years ago, it was nominated for Best True Crime Book of the Year at the World Mystery Convention. Didn't win, but was nominated. And it's the 20th anniversary edition, updated with new information. And it'll be coming out in paperback and in electronic and probably in Audible as well. And that's coming out soon. And that's one where there are sort of some rules to true crime that are real common between the books, whether it's from Kensington or Berkeley or whatever. But that particular book violates all the rules, pretty much.
Well, I gotta read it then for sure if it broke all the rules. Yeah, I know all about that.
And also Jack Olson, who was the America's Dean of True Crime.
Yeah.
He loved it. He tracked me down just to tell me how much he loved the book, which really meant a lot to me. And he was a mentor to me, and a big help to my. He told me, he says, "Get out of true crime while you can."
Jack Olson. Jack Olson is in my estimation the best true crime author. Not that there's great authors like yourself, but there's great authors. But Jack Olson still, from the story selection. And he just was the master. I mean, everything he wrote was just you were involved and sucked into the story immediately.
I told Jack when I read the opening page of his book, Salt of the Earth, I wanted to just take my word processor and throw it in the book. I told him this. I said, Jack, if I could ever write half as well as you do, in that opening page of Salt of the Earth, I'd be a happy man.
Yeah.
He said, don't worry, kid, you'll get there. Just keep pounding away. But he was brilliant author.
Well, he influenced me with his last book, and I didn't know it was going to be his last, but it was his last book, and that was Creation of a Serial Killer, which is the Jesperson, Keith Hunter Jesperson story, and in your neck of the woods. So. Yeah, that was an eye opener.
This is the last true crime book I'm ever going to write. He says, I promise I'm never going to write another one. And, well, unfortunately, he was right because he passed away.
Yeah. Well, he was. I think he almost, redefined the genre, or he tried to do with that book in terms of really letting the killer, because you really had this very unusual killer. Jesperson, where he really wanted to talk and was quite articulate, and he certainly wasn't shy about his motives, or he was very forthcoming, which is not always the norm. And,
well, your guy, shouldn't call him your guy, but your the fellow who got hold of you to do Trophy Kill. I mean, this guy, he certainly was very cooperative on telling you all of his distorted, sick, perverse reasons for doing what he did.
Yeah. He's very similar to...
I can't see him.
Yeah, he's very similar
without thinking of this guy.
Yeah, he's among the very few that really want to talk that much. You know, the Dennis Nielsen's and the Jespersons. There are a few of them, and I would speculate that there's going to be a lot more when you start having television programs where they have a serial killer on the phone line. It seems to be an indication that these guys all want to be famous, all want their little moment
really
in the sun.
They all defend themselves in court, too, for the most part. Their egos are so huge that you can't fit them and the jury into the courtroom at the same time.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, and where I'm looking forward to the Luca Magnotta case, which will be probably in about a year, from Montreal, where he sent the body parts to the police and to an elementary school of his victim, and then also had posted the killing and the murder of and supposed necrophilia of the victim as well online, and then escaped to Germany, Berlin, and then Paris. So, you know, here's a story.
I just found out you and I were on your show several months ago talking about my book Body Count, about the Spokane serial killer Robert Lee Yates. I just been informed there's going to be a 6-part documentary done.
Oh, great.
On that. And he got a hold of me and asked if I would participate. And I said, yes, get out your checkbook. But we'll
and where's that going to be on? What is that on?
I think that it's being done for an Investigation Discovery. It's being done by a production company called Storyhouse. And they were trying to decide between that and the Hillside Strangler case. And they decided to do it on Robert Lee Yates.
Oh, good choice.
I think so. We'll see.
Yeah, well, you've written a great book about it, and you're accessible. Hillside Strangler. I think that it might be hard to get a hold of the authors of that, or maybe it's not so familiar in people's minds anymore. The Hillside. That's a long time ago. Yeah,
it's always difficult to find some of the witnesses or some of the people you talk to on any case after a number of years, because they tend to either evaporate or many of them pass away, you know, and it makes it difficult. But at least with the Robert Lee Yates case, people still around, families of the victims, you know, brothers and sisters, and people who knew him, and knew the victim as much as I did. So.
Yeah.
And even in Fatal Beauty, the book about Rhonda Glover, she participated, as you're mentioning, Jack Olson's book. I let her comment on everything she wanted to comment on and put it in the book.
Sure.
Now, some people didn't care for that one. You talk about people who like by putting things into context. There's probably an equal or greater number of people who don't. But, you know, this is for an author, you have to, you know, my editor told me, Michaela Hamilton at Kensington, said, don't read the reviews on Amazon, because people will go after you on all manner of things. If it gets to you, it'll affect your writing. And she was right. It did get to me, and it did affect my writing. When I was doing Fatal Beauty, and she finds that, hey, you've written books before. just write the book. You know, don't pay any attention.
Well, it's hard to comprehend how people would write such a scathing personal review, and I think that's the thing that no one is really used to. And it's like I don't know if this is the word, troll, but it's somebody that goes out of their way to be nasty online because they are anonymous. I mean, not to say that there aren't valid bad reviews of my book or anyone's book.
Oh, sure.
But
I
I've
don't mind
seen
if
books
someone gives it a negative review because they didn't like the narrative style I use. I think it was Publishers Weekly said that they rightly recognized what I was doing stylistically, which was doing that particular book as if it were a television documentary except written and not visual. And that was, I purposely chose that style. It was an experiment. And they said, yeah, that's what he did. But the problem is that's what it feels like. Well, I wanted it to feel like that, but they didn't. So, I mean, that's what I call a valid criticism. You know, but to give a book one star because the crime is so horrifying. What does it have to do with the...
Yeah. Yeah, like I say, some people are new to true crime, and I think it shocks them to comprehend what it's all about. So, because I see typically...
the book would have been better if it had been written from the perspective of the killer. Well, in a nonfiction book, you cannot write a book that has interior dialogue, like you can in a novel, what people are thinking, because it's a true story, and you're not in their head. You don't know what they were thinking. So you can't say. Now, that was what was problematic with Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, brilliant book, but he made it was like a docudrama. He novelized it, and he has interior dialogue, which in journalistic true crime is a no-no. It's a different art form. It's a different form entirely. There's no way I could say it. Then Dan was thinking such and such. Well, I don't know what Dan's thinking. In a fiction novel I could do that, but not as a journalist.
Well, Jack Olson pointed out some things. He was quite critical of Capote in Cold Blood, because everyone that hadn't read it, and I still talk to people who haven't read it, talk about how revolutionary it was and what an incredible true crime book it was. And I said, yeah, but listen to this. His editor, the publisher, paid an incredible amount of money to be able to hire, to be able to stall the foregone conclusion of the trial itself. So a lot of money was spent to have him to have access. Then he betrayed that killer, and then took no notes, and then created dialogue and made composite characters. So that book wouldn't get published today.
No,
I can't see it being published.
But then you have books like, say, Sleepers by Lorenzo Cartera. Great book, excellent movie with Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman and Kevin Bacon, and originally came out as a true crime book. And it's not true. It's not true at all. But it's a very entertaining book and a very entertaining movie. So Jack and Gary C. King and about 6-7 other true crime authors all got together and petitioned the publisher, please, nothing against Lorenzo, we like him and glad he's making money, but please don't call this a true story. Please don't call it a true crime book, because it's not. It's not a true story. And so when the movie came out, it said, based on the controversial novel by Lorenzo Cartera, rather than saying the shocking true story, because it's a great book, but it's not a true story.
Yeah, well,
that's inspired by events that might have happened.
Yeah. Well, Burl, I got to get back to a little bit of this Audible, just for our audience.
Please do.
I wanted to tell people that Audible has a 30-day free trial, and again, where you can choose the book of your desire, and really experience Audible's digital audiobooks. I guess you know this. They have over 150,000 titles, and that's a growing list. And as you know, they have the very best narrators. And they also are...
Ian Ogilvy, the actor and author and director Ian Ogilvy, who played Simon Templar in Return of the Saint, and has even been a co-host of mine a couple times on True Crime Uncensored, does many of the James Bond books, and does a great job.
Yeah, it's great.
Into Bond, we picked some Ian Ogilvy books from Audible.
And you were commissioned to do, from the estate of the saint as well, to write new books. Where are you in that project right now, Burl?
Well, the first one, Capture the Saint, came out several years ago to, I can't say universally good reviews, but majority of good reviews. And the second one, which I had held off writing it because we sort of had a TV series forthcoming, so I kept stopping because I wanted to make sure that it was consistent with the TV show. And there was a new pilot done with Adam Rayner doing a great job playing the Saint. And then there's ran into some problems there with Mr. Rayner not being able to stay with the role. But I've got a second novel with various titles. Called Return of the Saint, Saint in the 21st Century, whatever. That's just about almost half done. I keep putting it on the shelf and taking it off. Meanwhile, Ian Dickerson is about halfway into also writing an original Saint novel. So I think Saint fans will get a double whammy sometime in 2014 if we both finish our novels and they both come out. So,
wow, that'd be exciting to have that on Audible, wouldn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah. There are some of the other Saint books are on Audible, I believe, but I think those will be also. So for Saint fans, it's something to look forward to.
Yeah, that'd be great. You're a busy guy. Yeah. You know what I didn't know?
You got a new book you're working on?
Pardon me?
I said, have you got another gruesome case you're working on?
Well, they're always gruesome. I mean, it's Canada after all, and somebody's got to put a spotlight on these. I think the Luca Magnotta case is what I want to work on because I think it has some international legs. There was a case here in Winnipeg. I would have written a book, but I would have betrayed a confidence in someone that I'm working on another project, but it involves. You just can't even believe the police response, the courts. Just when I think I know the depth of corruption, it's not even leniency. Not corruption. No. It's just a different mindset. Just the sorry state of our legal affairs in Canada. Our judicial system is just jammed. They're handcuffed. They can't deal with anything. But the lawyer for the serial killer named Sean Cameron Lamb said to his client, "You're going to be the first serial killer released in North America."
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So this is a guy that. I'm going to be doing this story probably on the program just because it's just all bottled up in my head, and I had done a fair amount of research, and with a partner we had contacted Sean Cameron Lamb, and then the trial happened lickety-split, but it's a real case of, again, women categorized as prostitutes, but I just categorize them as victims, happen to be on the street where the serial killer is trolling. And you won't believe the dynamics.
That's why he picked them. That is why
absolutely.
They picked them. Because they are viewed as disposable human beings. As long as they're killing them, they're not killing real people. Well, guess what? They are real people, just as real as you are or anybody else. They got kids, they got family that loves them, they got, they're real human beings. And it's just tragic. I mean, this is something that really I get on my soapbox about. And you had, the woman who wrote On the Farm about the pig farmer guy.
Stevie Cameron, yeah.
Stevie
Cameron.
Now you couldn't even get that book out for like 8 years because of your laws in Canada where you can't talk about a case that isn't resolved yet or can't write about it. It took forever for that book to come out.
Yeah, and then, Canadians didn't learn a single thing from the most expensive trial in Canadian history, and then the subsequent most expensive inquiry into what went wrong. Well, no one noticed, and it really didn't amount to anything, but they spent a boatload of money for a millionaire serial killer. So incredible story that not enough people really, it had those elements.
So tragic that the police knew what was going on, even knew who was doing it, but looked the other way because they didn't have the budget, they didn't have the training, and besides, who cares?
Well, there was a little more to that, but it's when you see some of these stories, especially in Canada, that no one really examines for what you can really learn from them, is that there is, I have to say, police ineptitude. Then there is the chicanery, basically, that can go on in the trial from someone's perspective, and maybe it's a defense, or, again, the sort of natural Canadian handicap of the prosecutors, and you kind of just throw your hands up in the air and you can't believe that we couldn't even get a conviction for more than 6 murders, second degree, yet there was remains of upwards of 30 people at that farm, and only 6 families had the right to have their trial heard in a court of law. Canadian judicial system couldn't process those 30 trials, so the other people did not get their semblance of justice at trial.
And again, that's another story. You know. So it's not something you would see in America. At least they do at least some lip service to the victims' families and include them somewhat in the decision.
Right, or what they usually do in a serial killer case is the one that has the most amount of evidence is the one they don't use, because that way, if the other ones fail, they've got that one for backup.
Yeah, but this was when you have all of it was. To me, I think if a prosecutor looked at it in America, they would not have the same outcome in terms of that inability to be able to try more than 6 cases. And certainly, I think anybody were to look at this in a precursory way, they would realize that in America, you certainly, I think, could get a first-degree murder conviction after you had 26 bodies on your property. I mean,
well, it depends on how many they charged him with. On Robert Lee Yates, I can't remember how many they charged him with. They didn't charge him with all 18 or whatever. Of course, he confessed and cut a deal, and then they reneged on the deal, which is kind of unfortunate. So that's why they did have a trial second time around for the ones in Pierce County. And everything regarding the Spokane County ones was sealed, so there was nothing there because he cut a deal. But if you have to put the jury everything through basically trying 6 different homicide cases, 6 different defenses, that's really extreme. If you got enough if you're pretty sure this guy did it, and you won't confess, well, then you pick the best ones you have, or the second best ones you have, maybe 2 or 3 of them, and go for it to get him convicted. Or then you have a situation like Willis Wilson, I don't think you've had on, but he was charged with kidnapping a woman, holding her at knife point, and forcing her to perform various sexual acts, and they wanted to connect him to 6 homicides. Exact same modus operandi, it's also killing kids, etc. Well, it turned out they had the wrong guy. But they browbeat this guy to try to get him to confess, to cut a plea bargain deal that he wouldn't get the death penalty. And the whole time he kept saying, but it's not me. It's not me. And the eyewitness, the woman said, oh, that's him. She picked him out of the lineup. Well, that wasn't too difficult. He was the only guy in the lineup who looked like the description. Yeah. But he wasn't the guy. He wasn't the killer. He wasn't even the guy who kidnapped her at all. Fortunately, the jury came back with not guilty, and the judge looked at him and said, son, you've been through a hell of a lot. I'm taking you out for ice cream. And then the ironic thing is that Willis actually was sitting at a bar, and in comes the real guy. Sits down next to him. Of course, the real guy doesn't know who Willis is, and Wilson's looking this guy over, and he fits the description perfectly, right down to the brand of shoes he's wearing. And found out from the guy where he was going next. He called the cops as the real guy, and they didn't even want to hear about it. He said, go away. We don't want to talk to you. Go away. They were mad at him that he wasn't guilty.
Jeez. Yeah, well, when they've made up their minds and the prosecutors have done the work, it's hard for them to admit mistakes, and that ego is disturbing, I think. Well, that's where it's nice to see
people getting out of prison after serving 20 years for a murder that they didn't commit.
Yeah.
The post-traumatic stress syndrome of being convicted of something you didn't do. It's bad enough being accused of something you didn't do, but to be convicted,
Well, I don't understand how, with all the checks and balances and on all the pointy heads, this incredible system can rupture like so that.
Easy. I have seen, this is tragic but true, I have seen police hand a blank piece of paper to someone and say, just sign your name to this. We'll fill in the rest.
That's amazing. Yeah.
I have seen signed confessions where the name is misspelled and the handwriting's wrong. I mean, people are very naive when they, I don't know what it's like in Canada, but you've got wonderful, dedicated homicide detectives, you got some wonderful, dedicated police, and then you have just the opposite. And it's harder than hell to get the crooked, corrupt ones out once they're in. And I had the fellow who I called America's favorite corrupt cop, wrote the book Chili Pimpin' in Atlantic City. I don't know if you've read that book or talked to that author, but he was the most corrupt cop in the history of the New York Police Department, never got arrested, never got punished. And he wrote a book about it, about how that was his goal. His goal in life was to be a corrupt cop in New York, and he achieved his goal. And he is brutally honest on all the levels of corruption, all the different internal gangs of police that specialize in this type of corruption, that type of corruption, framing people, planning evidence, why they do it and, what they get out of it. It was very fascinating, but it was also very upsetting.
Yeah, I don't know if I've heard the program, but I've seen it up on your list. It was a while ago, maybe a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I remember reading the description of the story. Yeah. Well, Burl, we're going to have you back on with Man Overboard. Hopefully, it's always great to have you on.
The guy, the criminal, Phil Champagne, my buddy GM for the mystery novels, gets a big kick out of this. It's the only true crime book signing he's aware of where the true crime author took the criminal with him to the book signings. You can get your book signed by the author and by the criminal.
Nice bonus.
Yeah, nice. So you get to meet the criminal. Yeah, because he was out of prison by the time the book came out, so he went on a book tour. Yeah, you could have him on the show, too, at the same time.
Just don't give him your number.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any personal information to the guy, yeah. Now, I wanted to say, too, we were talking about Audible, and I got to do this one more time here because I want people to visit Audible right now because of this 30-day free trial. And when they do visit Audible, visit audible.com/truemurder. Tell them Dan sent you. And this is to sign up today for a 30-day free trial. And I'm happy to have Audible here as the sponsor of the program. And I also wanted to say that I didn't know this, but they are the biggest producer of spoken audio entertainment, informational, and educational programming on the Internet. They do audio versions of magazines and newspapers, television programs, and radio programs. So they're very deep. They're an Amazon company, and Audible has, again, I remember seeing audio books at about $150 for a box set. And with postage, when you start sending 6 or 8 CDs in the mail in a plastic box with shipping, Canada's much worse than the U.S. in terms of shipping rates. So It's nice to see. It's nice to see the book come over the Internet when that spur of the moment comes to you. Hey, I'd like to get Burl Baer's book or any of the great authors around True Murder, one of their books, and Audible has a great narrator. And I think people that, again, an e-book is reading a book. And again, of course, there's nothing like reading a book, but there is nothing like listening to someone read a book to you as well. And there's a lot of people, a lot of fans that access on iPhones and try to maximize their entertainment time. And I think this is just another dimension for the diehard true crime fan now to be able to, when they don't have the time, to listen to somebody read Burl Baer's book to you and maximize your entertainment time. Yeah. It'd be nice.
How are we doing time-wise? My dinner, I can smell my dinner cooking.
Yeah, well, it must be burning by now.
Yeah.
No, we're going to wrap up now, I guess, Burl, and thank you very much for coming on and talking about Mom Said Kill. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program.
Yeah, it's available in every known e-book format. You can get it from Amazon, of course, and the Kindle, and also in all the other formats. You might be able to find it in paperback, but it might be used, and I prefer you got it new.
Yeah, absolutely.
Check with Amazon CA in Canada and see if they got the paperback or it's available as an ebook in your favorite format.
Yeah, and for those listening to the program, too, you have about 6 other true crime books and more on the way, I believe. And so stay tuned for more fascinating stories from Burl Baer with his books. You've been doing this for maybe 20 years now, haven't you, Burl?
Well, yeah, the first true crime book was 2000. Well, actually, no, before that, it was Man Overboard was in 1998. But then 2000 with Murder in the Family for Kensington. That's how long I've been with Kensington now. It's 14 years now. Well, anyway, thank you so much for having me on. I always appreciate it, Dan. You do a great show. We talk about you on my show. So
I know, and I'm
our guests doesn't show up, we just say, go listen to Dan's show. They showed up for his show.
Yeah, we both had that sort of our guest, so we were looking around, where is that guest? We haven't heard from him, so sometimes that makes for a great program when the guy didn't show up. I had a great time listening. You guys kept saying, no, he's still not here, but
still not here, that's right.
Yeah, great live radio.
You have a great night, Dan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Burl. Good night.
Okay, bye-bye.